Welcome back to The Price of Business. This is William Edmunson in for Kevin. And I've got Ray Thompson, a principal with WP&T Communications. Ray, glad to have you on.
Hey, thanks, William. I'm a fan of the show and what you guys and Kevin are doing over there. Thanks for the good programs.
Oh, gosh, our pleasure. Hey, so a lot of people may not be familiar with what WP&T is. Tell us a little bit about what you guys do and about the company.
Well, thanks. Sure. We're speech coaches, communications training and coaching on camera for typically we're working with a corner office, C-suite executives and others, getting them ready for, investor roadshows or employee town hall meetings or in some cases congressional testimony. But we're based here in Houston, but I've got folks literally scattered around the world, a big group here in Houston and in the U.S. and then folks in Europe and Asia Pacific and a couple down in Australia as well.
Oh, that's great. What kind of companies do you typically work with, Ray?
Well, we're a small company ourselves, so occasionally we will work with other small and mid-sized company, their leadership. Our typical profile, William, is a lot of large multinational companies who, have their names on buildings. They care about their reputation. They are accustomed to being in the public spotlight. They care about, executive development. So these are large publicly held companies. Several, frankly, Fortune 50 companies are in our client roster. And what we find is when you're working at the top of the house, there's a great deal of trust that's required. And it's so, when we tend to do a lot of business with some of those companies in various areas in which we work. So
sure.
That's a typical profile.
That sounds good. I know when I was with some Fortune 500 companies, there were a lot of resources, and we used companies like yours to come in and train us. So we'd be able to do those road shows. We'd be able to go and speak with franchisees, whether it be a convention, on television or radio and that kind of thing. And it is important to be prepared.
Well, you're right. I know you had spent a long time in the hospitality industry, and, these are companies that care about their reputation. And, any company that, wants to use communications to drive and improve their business, we know that great leaders tend to be great communicators.
Absolutely.
And there just are things you should and shouldn't do in various settings, and we've developed some expertise around that. Many of us are former journalists, but more importantly, we've just worked in the field of public and government affairs and strategic communications. I've got some folks on my team who are in, and do presentation training in the university setting, and others who have been on the front lines with Wall Street or as spokespeople. So we got a good team of people who help under organizations, put their best foot forward.
That's great. Well, can you share some of your secrets? I know you spend a lot of time in the C-suites at some of these Fortune 500, Fortune 50 companies. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're telling these folks as you work with them coaching on their communications and training programs?
Well, thanks. I'm happy to. And, William, I was thinking for your listeners, many of them, some of their clients may be like mine, some of these very large companies, and or for themselves when people are presenting to them. And, we spend a lot of time in that corner office, as I said, and I'll share with you sort of a philosophy and a way of thinking about the communications first. And we use a little pyramid model which you build from the ground up. And I've got a couple of little, base and the foundation is around a set of questions. And the first is, what's your business objective for, if it's a media interview or a presentation to your board of directors? We like people to really hone in on what is it you're trying to get your audience to know, to feel, or to do. And it's that, it's a good basic fundamental question because it's not always just education and give information out. And busy executives don't have time to just provide presentations or communications that inform. It's usually around changing the way people feel and behave. And we've got some good advice and counsel on how to be more strategic at that first primary level. What's your business objective? And I'm sort of happy to talk you up through the rest of those if
Sure, that's
you
great.
think that's helpful.
Yeah.
The other, once you've decided, okay, what do I want people to do now that they've heard from me, before you rush up to message, and there's this tendency that, hey, I want to tell you a bunch of stuff so that you know how we feel or how we want you to feel or what we want you to do. There's a tendency then to start putting together messages and slides and data.
Right.
And all that stuff's necessary. You do need a well-structured argument. You need a good message architecture. But we counsel people to be more audience-centered. And so before you rush to messaging, after you've defined the business objective, think about the audience.
A lot of people forget that step, but one of the most important things I was ever told before presenting was know your audience.
Yeah, it seems so simple, and of course you think, oh, I know my audience, but the layer we peel is how do they feel? What are their concerns? What are their drivers? We've got a lovely little audience analysis tool, and I think what your listeners could jot down is, okay, I'm presenting, what's my topic? Who's my audience? What's my goal? That's a healthy set of notes to have, but then think about, for this audience, how do I find them? What are their concerns? What's driving them? What's keeping them up at night right now? What excites them? And then how do they feel? That exploration, boy, that's going to yield better messaging. I know you get that.
Absolutely.
And that is the next step, then, better messaging. Having thought through what's the goal, who's the audience now, okay, what am I going to tell them? And, hey, there's something we refer to as the forgetting curve. The German researcher who developed and documented the learning curve also outlined for people the forgetting curve. And William, you may have heard this earlier, and you've probably forgotten what people remember. It's not very much, and it is always anchored around when people remember your message. They're going to remember things in those two areas I just talked about, things you talk about that address their priorities, the what's in it for me.
Right.
And they're going to remember the emotional connection you have. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so great communicators are building their messages to first address the audience or acknowledge at least audience perspective, concerns, feelings. And then they recognize, hey, people are only going to remember 7 to 10% of what I say. That's what the research is telling us these days. They remember very little. So you got to be clear, whether it's a media interview and you keep coming back to a set of message themes or a tough conversation with an emotional audience on a controversial subject. What are the key themes? And we like to think of some messaging architecture. What's the key message, the premise, the big idea, and then back that up with some logical, well-organized columns of support, what we call key supports in 3 or 4 categories. And then the most powerful layer is the stories. William, great communicators are great storytellers, and we need to use stories to improve what people remember and help to influence the way they think, feel, and behave.
Absolutely. And the stories a lot of times will connect with the audience, particularly if you've done all your homework on the audience and you select your story well, that really tends to stick.
It does, and it's, you touched on a really important point, is think about your long history, your experiences, and find stories that reinforce and build common ground with your audience. I was working with an executive earlier this week, and they're communicating change in an organization. And this person, as he was preparing to go into this big town hall meeting where there's going to be some significant organizational change, he was working on remarks that began with, hey, like many of you, I've seen a lot of changes in this company. As a young person, years ago, I've seen, different management teams come in. I know when change like this happens, it's disruptive. You're concerned about your family. You're thinking about what's my future and how much control do I have over my own destiny in the midst of this big organizational change. He was working on those kind of remarks, which we know will resonate with an audience. And you know what it does? Those kind of stories that build common ground, it gains a better listening posture, if you will.
Sure.
You know, people just listen better, and as you said, they connect better to your material.
Yeah, that's so important. I know when we announced to our team that we were selling Abbey Executive Suites to the Regis Group, one of the things that I tried to get across to our team is I know that, you know, I had to put myself in their shoes. I knew that they were thinking immediately, not, oh, gee, this is great for the owner of the company. They're thinking, what does this mean to me? How am I going to pay my house note? Am I going to have a job? You know, so it's important to keep those things in mind, and then, you know, put the empathy with it that you know needs to be partnered with it.
William, that's what makes you a good leader. Your ability, as you say, to put yourself in their shoes. Think about your issue, your topic from their perspective. And, you know, it's not always bad news. I mean, you know, even if you're getting people excited about a direction the company is going, you know, you want to touch on that, talk in plain terms about that excitement, but be very aware of the impact of all of these changes, decisions, messages on your audience. So, you know, as I said, it goes back to one, what's the business objective? Two, who's the audience? What's on their mind? What are their concerns? Three, what are the messages I'm going to deliver? And, you know, I got to have the high-level things. They won't remember much. I need to back it up with facts, data, key supports, and then I got to have my stories at the ready, stories that illustrate we get it, or here's the ways that, you know, we're want you to think and feel, or stories that did show where you're taking the organization. The top of that pyramid is what we call the U factor. It's the delivery elements, you know, the very common, how you look, how you sound, and what you say. In the final analysis, people remember for a very long time a net impression. What do I think of that guy? How did she do? And we have some pretty specific counsel on how you look, how you sound, to make sure it aligns with what you're saying.
Got it. Yeah, you know, I know that when people are putting together conferences, or when, you know, even when you're in a rush to get on some sort of crisis interview by the media, I've always watched people in those positions, and you know, you put a lot of time into making sure that you come off credibly, and you're so right. I mean, what you're wearing, how you look, what your composure is, even how you stand, or lean, or walk around, whatever it is you do while you're presenting, that is all part of that net impression. Very good.
You know, and what happens to, you know, skilled leaders like your listeners who run businesses, or, you know, large organizations, or leaders, you wouldn't be in those chairs and running organizations if you weren't a good communicator. But a lot of people plateau. They get to a certain level, and, hey, they're good, or they wouldn't be there. But what we find, William, is the difference between good and great is usually within reach of a speaker, a communicator, a leader, and it's, as you say, those basic fundamentals. And so all of our programs, I was in Seattle yesterday and Toledo on Monday. We've got cameras in the room. We're recording, critique, show. We play back. In fact, up in Seattle yesterday, we had a video screen. It was probably 30 by 40. It was a huge monster.
A jumbotron.
Yeah, and and here we are playing back close-ups of these executives, and in that case it was media training, and we were showing them, hey, here's what it looks like when you're awesome, you know, posture and how you're sitting and your use of stories. And so we always, you know, counsel folks, put yourself on camera, take a look at how you're doing, not just what you're saying, but invest in, I got to get better every year as a communicator. Don't plateau.
You know, and a lot of things we've been talking about, like your example right here, pertain more to big companies. But even for small companies, when they have an opportunity to speak at, the neighborhood meeting or the, whatever club they're a member of, the same principles apply.
Very much so. And, a tip I might give these leaders of small companies, oftentimes are doing business like I am with big companies.
Right.
And I've hear several things over and over again, William. Whenever I get a chance to work with a Fortune 50 or Fortune 500 CEO, I always ask, sir, what advice would you give people who present to you? And I say, sir, because as you and I both know, women and minorities are underrepresented in that corner office in the
Sure.
large companies.
Sure.
I think you and I are both working to change that. But there's, what I hear are four things when you ask a CEO, what advice would you give people to present to you? And it's pretty straightforward, but I think this is helpful. One thing I hear is get to the point. Busy executives like yourself, you don't have time for a lot of fluff. So you want to know, put the bottom line first, put the key message, the headline up front, as we say in the newspaper business. Don't bury the lead.
Right.
So that's the first thing, get to the point. Second, are you sure? They want to know, they want to be impressed with that you've done your homework, that you've looked at this issue from both sides, that you know the pros and the cons. And so executives in that large companies, they're risk managers. And so they're in the risk management business. They don't like surprises. So they want to get a signal from you that you've really looked this over. It doesn't mean bury them in detail, but show them, we've done our homework. So number one, what's your point? Number two, are you sure? Then I find executives stop and reflect. Do I agree? Because they're, accustomed to making decisions pretty quickly, and they want to think right then in process. Okay, does that square with what I know or what I've been told or my own experience? So
Sure.
What's your point? Are you sure? Do I agree? And then the last one, and the critical one, is what do you want? And, oftentimes, it's, hey, I need resources or people or money or just leave me alone. Maybe their request is what you want the executive not to do. Sir, everything's fine here. Carry on, nothing to see. Let us do our work.
Got it under control, right?
Yeah, that's it. So I hope that's helpful to some of your listeners.
That is. Now, Ray, we're coming to the end of the time. Tell us how people can reach out to you and to your company if they have needs for more advice or need some training.
You're very kind, Bill, William, and I would say to other folks listening out there, this is the reason you want to be on the show with William and Kevin at the Price of Business. They're just a great forum for businesses to talk to one another. We are quite available and would welcome a chance to work with folks individually or organizations. WP&T Communications is the company. You can find us online, WPNT.com. And we've got great trainers, great speech coaches, and great camera people ready to come to work for you if you need us. But either way, hey, thanks for the time.
That's perfect. Thank you for being on. Thank you for those tips. I know even though I've been through a lot of this kind of training, I've taken some notes just to keep in my personal files, and I hope this has been good for all of the listeners.
And William, thanks so much, and keep up the good work. Tell Kevin I said thanks.
I will do it. Thank you so much. We'll be back with more Price of Business after this.